I was born in New Orleans. My mother just came to Truro for me to be born because my mother and father lived in Independence, Louisiana. My father was a wholesale distributor, a candy jobber, and he had anything that a general store would have had at that time, and I was born in 1940. I worked in the store sometimes during the summers. I'm talking about his store, Dixie Candy and Novelty Company. And he wanted me to know what work was like. And frankly, I think he wanted me to realize what a sacrifice he was making, not in a mean way, but just to know that you needed to work hard if you wanted to accomplish anything. And I really, really credit my father and my mother for instilling a really strong work ethic in me. And that's something I've really tried to instill in my children. I started school in Independence, Louisiana. At that time, some of the teachers were not even graduates of college. And that was another impetus for us to move to New Orleans, because not only did my father want us to have the religious background that we couldn't get there because we were Jewish, but also to be able to get the best possible education, everyday education that we could possibly get. And when we moved to New Orleans, I started at A.H. Wilson School, which still exists in New Orleans, and went there for 1 year. It was right across the street from the Communal Hebrew School, so it was really convenient to cross the street and go to Hebrew school. At the end of 1 year there, you moved to McMain High School, which was a junior high, and I was there from the 7th and 8th grades. At the end of the 8th grade, one of my absolute best friends was a woman named Sandra Altschul. Sandy told me that she was going to Newman the next year, and I remember feeling my best friend at the time can't leave me. I've got to go with her. And I said to her, "You're not going without me." And I went home and asked my dad if he would send me to Newman, and he said, "If you take the test and get in, I will find the money to send you." And he did, by going to Whitney Bank and borrowing money every semester and paying it off and then borrowing for the next semester. When I completed Newman, I went to Northwestern in Evanston, Illinois, and I went there for 2 years. And I had gone there because we had visited when we were in Chicago at a candy convention. And then I left Northwestern. I transferred from Northwestern at the end of my sophomore year and went to Newcomb, and I graduated from Newcomb in 1962. I met my husband, Steve Abramson, when I was 16 years old, and I was a junior at Newman, and he was at the University of Louisiana, Lafayette, but it was then called Southwestern Louisiana Institute. And I met him through a mutual friend named Al Lippman, who is actually an attorney from Morgan City. And I'd known Al growing up, who would come to New Orleans and go out with a big group of us, including Edie Rosenblum, Edie Levy. And I met Al through Edie and a group of good friends. And Al went to Southwestern. He's not related to Steve, but he claimed Steve as a cousin, and maybe somewhere way back there is a family connection. And he wrote me a letter from Southwestern and said, "I want you to meet my cousin. I want to fix you up on a blind date." And I actually even remember the movie. It was From Here to Eternity. And we went to the Low State and sat in the, did we sit in the balcony? I'm not so sure. But anyway, and then I would go out with Steve whenever he would come into New Orleans, which wasn't real often, but it was often enough, and we stayed in touch through those years. I graduated from Newcomb in 1962. Steve graduated from medical school in 1962. We'd become engaged at the Christmas holidays before graduation, and he had to take his state boards. He took those and we got married right after that. Got married to Steve at the end of my senior year after he completed his exams, his state boards. I went to work for what was called the Department of Public Welfare, and I worked down on 2256 North Claiborne Avenue. Very interesting area. That's, you know, the Treme, that's That's the Ninth Ward, Lower and Upper Ninth Ward. That's the Desire projects. It's the Iberville projects. It's the Florida projects. And it was really quite an area for a 22-year-old to be traveling all around. And you made home visits at that time. You never quite knew what you were going into. And I worked only with old age assistance and disability assistance, some assistance to children that were where the parents were dependent on welfare to be able to support their children. David was born in 1966 when Steve was in his residency. And just shy of 15 months, 14 months, 15 months minus 1 day, Neil was born. So we had 2 young children. I stopped working when David was born and was a stay-at-home mom, got pregnant for the second child, which was another wonderful little baby boy. And in '67, Neil was born. We left, and as I said, went to Gonzales. When Steve moved us to Gonzales, at that time I was pregnant for my 3rd child. David wasn't even 3.5 years old when Stephanie was born, so I had 3 under 3.5 years old. I always wanted to go to law school. It was just a dream. I can't tell you where it came from. I wanted another degree. I wanted the academic stimulation. I wanted something else to do. It was just another mountain to climb and plant a flag. And Steve's accident really was part of the impetus to do that, because I had wanted to do it earlier on when the children were younger, and had decided that that I really needed to be there when they were young. I was the carpool driver, for a really long time going into Gonzales, and they were so close together in age that I felt like I needed to be home at the time. Both boys went to Dartmouth, and when David was a sophomore and Neil was a freshman, David made the comment to me, if you'd stop talking about law school, because I'd been talking about law school a long time, and just do it, Mom, you'd have been finished by now. David must have been a sophomore when Steve had his accident. So for about 4 years, I really kept thinking, what if something had happened to Steve and I had to support these 4 children? You have insurance, and you have disability insurance, and you have life insurance, but you never really know if you would have enough. And I kept thinking, what would I do if I really was the breadwinner, if I was the one that would be responsible for these kids? So that was really an extra impetus to want to go ahead and go to law school. Plus David's sage advice, just do it and get it over with. And I got into LSU Law School. Steve was unbelievable at stepping up and being Mr. Mom. When my father died, he had left me, it was not a lot of money. He had left, my mother had full usufruct of everything, but he had left me a little bit of money, and I used that money to go to law school, although Steve was more than ready, willing, and able to pay for it, because this was something that I felt like my father would want me to do. And so I used those funds initially to go to law school, sort of as a tribute to my father, and of course to my mother as well. I went to law school in 1985, and when I finished my first exam, after being in a panic that I was going to fail because I hadn't started studying early enough, a young gentleman walked out at the same time I did, and the test was in civil law systems. And he said to me, "How did you find the exam?" And I replied, "It's the first exam, other than the LSAT, that I've taken since 1962. And he replied, "I was born in 1962. It now being 1985, I thought, I've lost my mind to think that I can come back and go to law school and be successful when I've been out of school someone's whole lifetime." And I cried all the way home to Gonzales. But I did pass, and I did succeed in finishing law school. I was fortunate enough to be offered a position with the Kean Miller law firm, which I took and which I loved. And I've loved them because they've been very good to me through the years. Because I was older, I had a certain amount of built-in, authority is not the right word, but experience. Attorneys that were from other places that didn't know me in my other life, my pre-law school life, thought I was older and more experienced. So they showed me more of the respect than you would have expected them to have done, or at least I felt like they did, which was really fun. For example, those attorneys in Baton Rouge, not in Baton Rouge, in Florida, thought I had been practicing 30 or 40 years, not that long, but maybe 30 years at the time. So it was great. The judges down there, for the most part, thought I was a very experienced attorney. So I didn't get any of that, you know, fresh, young attorney that somebody could beat up on because they thought I was more experienced. Depositions were taken in Palm Beach, and in Palm Beach we were taking the deposition of a Mr. Rossioli, who had bought again the yacht division, and we had to take his deposition. His attorney, who was defending his deposition, was F. Lee Bailey, the F. Lee Bailey. And so we're down in Florida, and we had issued a subpoena ducis tecum for a lot of records. We were trying to ascertain what's the value of these yachts, because that was how, if we lost or if we made an offer to settle, we would know how much to value them at. And he didn't show up with all of the documents that had been issued on the subpoena ducis tecum, but he agreed during the deposition that he would provide them if we needed to continue the deposition. We would continue once we received the documents. I came back to Baton Rouge, and I went out to lunch one day, and there was the receptionist was a woman who had been at Kean Miller long before many of the attorneys, certainly longer than I had been there. She was quite a character. Her name was Mathile Stafford, and she really had a quick tongue. I came back from being out at lunch, and she had a note. There was a wall behind where she sat, and she had put a piece of paper on it, and it said, "See me about F. Lee Bailey, ha ha." And so I said, "Okay, Mathile, what's the deal?" And she said, "One of your smart aleck friends from New Orleans," and the reason she said smart aleck was because my friends from New Orleans would occasionally, not too often, but occasionally call me, and they had gotten to know Mathile, because Mathile would be the person who recognized everyone's voice. If she ever took your name, she remembered you. She said, "I didn't recognize this voice, but it had to be one of your smart aleck friends. Told me that he was F. Lee Bailey, and there's no way F. Lee Bailey's calling you." And I said, "Surprise, Mathile, F. Lee Bailey did call me." And I went in and I called F. Lee Bailey, who let me have it, both guns, that the receptionist had been so rude to him, and had called him, tried to call him out and tell him he wasn't F. Lee Bailey, and that she had informed her that he was in fact the F. Lee Bailey. I ran for the board, and I was elected. And in the Baton Rouge Bar Association, historically, if you've done a good job, then you're going to get elected the next year, and you basically just go up the ladder, and you'll ultimately be president. Well, I was vice president, and really looking forward to the next year, because it was going to be a big anniversary, the 150th anniversary for the Bar Association. And I was going to head up all the work done on that. And I got a phone call. Never forget, Kean Miller was having a partners retreat, and we were in the retreat, and I got a phone call to please come step outside the meeting and take this phone call. Ann Scroll, who's the executive director and has been for quite a while, told me that unfortunately David Hamilton, who was moving up to be president, would have been sworn in January, had drowned in a hunting accident. Just a really freak accident. He was on a four-wheeler, and it turned over in a rice field, and it drowned in just a little bit of water. They really believed that he had had a heart attack and had fallen off the four-wheeler. And she said, "You know, that means that you're going to have to step up." And I said, "I'm going to do whatever needs to be done." And one of my really good friends, who was right behind me on the ladder, had said, "Mathile, I know how much it means to you to head up the anniversary celebration, and if you want, I'll move up and take the leadership this year if you'd like to do that." And I said, "No, it's my responsibility." One other thing that I really am particularly proud of is actually Justice Kimball and Justice Weimer co-appointed me to serve as an ad hoc judge in the 23rd Judicial District. Even though Kean Miller, where I practice law, is in the 19th Judicial District, and even though I live in Ascension Parish, which is part of the 23rd Judicial District, and I would venture to guess that I'm the only attorney who was ever president of the Baton Rouge Bar Association who did not live actually in the parish. I live in Ascension. I was fortunate to be able to accept that appointment to serve, and I served for 7 months it's a 3-parish area. It's Ascension, Assumption, and St. James as an ad hoc judge. That's child in need of care. And that was because it was realized that children that were in foster care had the same attorneys that were representing the parents, and they had been taken out of the custody of those parents and put into foster care. And there was just such an innate conflict in that. We worked really, really hard to do that, and were able to make that happen. Kitty Kimball was fabulous. She was, of course, on the Supreme Court, and she worked with us. Kitty Kimball had a lot of respect for the Bar Foundation and worked with us with that program, as did the Supreme Court. They were just phenomenal. We were able to get funds to do it, and we made it happen. And I'm really, really proud of that. And I was recognized by the State Bar Association with one of the Pro Bono Publico Awards for that. I want to be remembered by everyone, I guess, as being a decent person, by being a person who showed kindness and showed patience, not always patience, but enough patience and enough kindness to other people, and that I lived by the golden rule, that I lived by do unto others as you would have others do unto you.